Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining us on this study of the Gospel of John. Today's lesson will be the last of these lessons on the Gospel of John, 44 of them. We'll turn our attention to the study of other scriptures. And in the coming future, we do plan to do a series on the book of Revelation. And yet, we will take an interval of about 6 or 7 weeks as we'll be studying what the Bible says about New Testament conversions, or in some cases of non-conversion. We hope that you'll join us and that you'll tell others about our podcast and that you will be able to join in the study of the Holy Scriptures. When we look in the last chapter of the Gospel of John, chapter 21, it is that records some things that none of the other of the Gospel writers record. In fact, John did not talk about many of the things that Matthew and Mark, particularly Luke, recorded. We find that Luke recorded many of the events of Jesus' appearance to those that were in Jerusalem, appearances after his resurrection. But the events that mainly are discussed in John 31 are not things of Jesus' appearance in Jerusalem. Rather, they are those that were events that occurred in the country of Galilee. Now, the disciples had left Galilee to come to the city of Jerusalem for the observance of the Passover. They'd stayed there some period of time. And Jesus had been raised from the dead 3 days after he'd been crucified. And they remained there at least another week, because the Bible tells of 2 occurrences on 2 different Sundays. And so they remained in Judea for another week. But sometime after that, they returned to Galilee. Jesus had appointed a mountain that he would talk with them on, and they went. And Peter, as it was customary for him, said to certain disciples that were around him, "I'm going fishing." And 6 of the other disciples said, we're going to go with you. And so they went and they fished all night, and they had fisherman's luck. They didn't catch anything. And as dawn was breaking, they saw a stranger that was standing on the shore. They didn't know who he was. But that stranger said to them, "Children, have you any bread?" And they said, "No, we've caught nothing." Jesus said, "Cast the net on the right side, you'll find." And so they did. And the net was filled with 153 fish. Now, this is the second time in which Jesus performed a miraculous draught of fishes. The first is recorded in Luke 5, I believe, and it was early in his ministry. In that, Peter expressed doubts about it because they'd had the same circumstances, fished all night, caught nothing. And Jesus said, "Let out the boat and let down the nets for a draught." And Peter said, "Lord, we've toiled all night, put up our nets, but at your command we'll do it." And they did. But they caught so many that the nets were breaking, and they called to the helpers in the other boat, James and John, to help them, and they got the boat to the shore. In this instance, though there was a large number of fish, the nets did not break. John, seeing Jesus standing there, recognized him and said, "It's the Master. It's Jesus." And Peter, when he heard that, jumped off the boat, having wrapped himself in his outer garment, drew the net and the ship to the shore. They were close to the bank. And as Peter neared the shore, he saw a fire that was burning. And as he approached closer, he saw that bread was cooking on that fire. And as they all got off the boat and drug the net up to the bank, Jesus said, "Bring some of that you've caught." And so they did. And they had breakfast on the shore of Galilee. But it was a quiet breakfast. No one said anything. The disciples all knew it was Jesus, but they were hesitant to say anything to him. After a while, Jesus broke the silence, and he said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And Peter said, yes, Lord, I love you. A second time, Jesus said to Simon, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And once more Peter responded, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And the third time Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because the master had asked him 3 times, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. In each of these instances, Jesus said either feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. And as we look 3 times, it's asked, and there are some things that are clearly apparent. Questions might ask, well, why did he ask 3 times this question? Well, that seems to be apparent. He asked the question first, do you love me more than these? And there was some uncertainty about that. But while he asked them, do you love me more than these? We do know that he asked him 3 times. And it would bring to Peter's remembrance those dark hours that they had gone through, the night that Jesus had been betrayed, tried, and crucified the next day. And Peter's mind must have rushed with the thoughts of his attitude to the master, in which that Jesus spoke and said, all of you this night are going to forsake me. I'm going to be betrayed by one of you that's in the midst, and all of you are going to desert me. Peter said, not me, Lord. I'm not going to ever. All of these may forsake you, but I'm not going to. And Jesus said, now, Peter, this night, before the cocks will crow, you will deny me 3 times. And it was just as the master said. When Peter got in foreign company, and in that was threatening to him. He was asked by the maid at the door where John had asked the maid to let him in because John was familiar to that household. She said, didn't I see you in the garden with him? He said, no, I wasn't there. Others later, as he warmed himself by the fire, said, you were in the garden with him. He said, no. Others said, your speech betrays you. You're a Galilean. You are surely one of this man's disciples. And he cursed and he swore and said, I don't know him. And then the cock crew. And Peter looked in the distance and he saw Jesus standing and remembered. And he went out and wept bitterly. How those thoughts must have rushed back to his mind 3 times. Jesus had asked him, do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter knew that he had denied him. He was not nearly so strong as he thought that he was. Now, some things are clear in the English translation. There may have been in the first some ambiguity about the matter of more than these. Of what? And to what did Jesus refer? Did he mean to Peter, do you love me more than these other disciples did? Or did he mean, do you love these disciples more than me? Or did he mean, do you love fishing more than me? Well, Peter was a fisherman. He loved to fish. And so it was a question for Peter to ponder. And he didn't respond to that question. He said, Lord, you know I love you. And when you look at that, well, surely it's clear that the principal question that Jesus was asking, do you love me more than these, Peter? These other disciples. You said you did. You said they might all forsake you. But you'd never do it. You would never deny me. Peter's denial and his cursing and swearing, acting anything like a disciple of Jesus, was that brought sadness to his heart. Sadness. And it's clear in regard to that. But then in the text, in the original text, there are some things that are not quite so clear. We would miss it, and we do miss it if it's only in the English translation. Because in that conversation between Jesus and Peter, while Jesus said, do you love me? It's the same word in English in Peter's response. Lord, you know I love you. But in the original language, it's not the same. Jesus said, Peter, I agape you. And that describes the idea of devoted love and committed love and affection. Peter couldn't answer that question. He couldn't use that word. He did say, I love you, and he used the word phileo, and that means you're very dear to me. Love with affection, but not at the higher level of agape. He would not confess that he reached the level of loving God, agape. He knew by the questions that Jesus asked, he'd not attained unto that. When he said, you love me more than these, the others might desert him, Peter said, but I won't. I love you more than those. But it became clearly apparent that Peter didn't love him more than those others did. They left him, but Peter left him too. But then we look again, and Jesus asked the question a second time. And the second time was, Peter, do you love me? Still, he used the word agape. And Peter still responded, Lord, you know I love you. Phileo. And then the third time, Jesus dropped to the level that Peter was using and used the same word that Peter used. He said, Peter, do you, phileo, do you love me? And it was then that Peter, being grieved, said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said first, when Peter said, I love you, feed my lambs. The second time, when Jesus said, do you love me? And Peter responded, you know I do, Lord. He said, tend my sheep. The third time, he said, yes, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Jesus reminded Peter by questioning him 3 times of the 3 times he denied him. Peter was duly humbled. He had grieved already. But he was restored back to his position of doing the things that Jesus said, I'm going to give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, when Jesus said, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, he wasn't giving something that was exclusively the right to Peter. This was the responsibility of all the apostles. He was just restored back to the status of being an apostle that would carry the gospel of Jesus Christ. Actually, when we look at these questions, it isn't just one question. Yes, it was 3 times asked, but there were 2 different questions that were asked. First, Jesus said, Peter, do you love me more than these? And he'd done the same thing they did. He couldn't say, yes, I love you more than they. But there was a second question, and it's very, very significant because he didn't say, do you love me more than these? He said simply, do you love me? And that's a question to ponder, my friend. Suppose Jesus were to ask me today, ask you today, do you love me? What would my response be? What would your response be? Can I truly say, yes, I love you? Now, he's given us reason enough to love him, to do what Peter said, sanctify in your hearts Christ as Lord, being ready to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason concerning the hope that's within you, it with meekness and fear. He's given us a reason to love him, for John 3:16 says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoso believeth in him might not perish, but might have everlasting life. He loved me. He's given me a reason to love him because he made me in his image. I have eternity in my heart. You have eternity in your heart. You're created in the image of God. He loved me. He loved you because he gave his life on Calvary so that I might not wither in sin and in anguish for all eternity because of my sins. He made it possible that I could escape the torments of Gehenna. of the matter of hell itself. He gave me that. As his child, he blesses me profoundly. He gave me reason to love him. He watches over me. He provides my daily needs. Seek ye first his kingdom, he said, Matthew 6, and his righteousness. And all these things shall be added unto you. Just like God takes care of the birds of the heaven, like takes care of the creatures of the field, like he clothes the grass with garments more glorious than that of Solomon. He provides for you. He begat in me and you a hope for resurrection by his own hope and resurrection. And he gave us a wondrous promise. Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go again, I will come again and return to you and get you, that where I am, ye may be also. Questions. First of all, do I love Jesus? He gave me reason to love him. Oh, it's easy to say, yes, I love Jesus. It's easy to say that. But remember, our answer isn't just an emotional answer. It's by the acknowledgement that God gave us a test to prove whether we love him or not. Did you know that? In John, the 15th chapter, and verse 14, Jesus said, if a man love me, he will keep my commandments. Now, you determine whether you love God or not by whether you keep his commandments or not. Now, that's a harder test, isn't it? Are you doing what Jesus told you to do? Do you put him first in your heart? Do you put his day first in your heart? Do you put the life he commands you to live in your heart? Do you put the obedience to him in becoming a Christian in your heart? Do you strive day by day to improve yourself? Do you love him? You prove that you do or you don't by whether you keep his commandments or you don't. The second, do you love him more than these? Do you love him more than your family? Do you love him more than the pleasures of life? Do you love him more than the things that are sinful? Do you love me more than these? Is a question to ponder. What would your answer be to either of these questions? Thank you, friend. God bless you and yours. And may Christ be allowed to reign and rule in your life and heart.